Hi there, welcome back to On the Flip Side. My name is Adam Shellwalker, your host, and today we're going to be covering this new-ish Cynic record, Ascension Codes. With the passing of Cynic alumni Sean Reinhart and Sean Malone, this new album seemed like it was not even really a possibility, but even with all of the tragedy this act has endured, the name still lives on, so Paul Masvidal has seemingly manned the helms on the project for quite a while now, and while it seems like a lot of thought and care was put into this album, I can't also help but feel that it may have been better left as a solo record. Cynic has had a long and strange career with a fairly small body of work that spans almost 3 decades. The departure from progressive death metal that was the band's second record, Traced in Air, was a very adventurous prog metal album that in many ways played off of their earlier material. Their third record, Kindly Bent to Free Us, pushed that envelope even further, quickly diving into progressive rock, and now it seems with this album there seems to be almost a disconnect between those last records and this new one. The unfortunate thing to me is that I do really like most of the material on this album, but it more closely resembles the work that Paul Masvidal has been releasing on his own for the last several years. By no means am I trying to say that this is a false Cynic record or that this is a bad album. I cannot help but think that this is just the way that this album was handled, while respectful in intention, has kind of put this album in a weird spot where it's almost a tribute album of sorts, but it also leaves the door open for future material to be released under the umbrella that is the Cynic name. I don't know if I really disagree with the move, but in some ways it seems a little bit too soon. Anyway, as for the material on this album, we have a fairly stacked track listing with 18 or so tracks, about half of which are short interlude songs that run around 30 seconds or so, give or take. I'm not really going to be focusing too much on the actual interlude tracks because they're less like actual songs and more like contextual garnish. They aren't really necessary, but the album does lose a little bit of flair if you don't include them. But with that being said, they're decent. They vary in quality quite a bit. So the first track, The Winged One, starts off this album with a lot of rising synth work that is very, very prevalent throughout the whole album. There's also some very clear drum machine work that is trying very hard to match the style of Sean Reinhart, and in that case, it mostly succeeds. The guitar work is pretty densely packed in, with some excellent full bass guitar work as well. The mood this track plays with is kind of a Cynic does the Division Bell sort of thing. It's very far removed from their other material, but it is no less complex and in many ways matches the quality of their previous material. There are a lot of 50-cent chords on this track. I mean, the jazz fusion stuff on this song is just kind of crazy. I think it's a great album starter. A lot of the material on this record is very, very reminiscent of other progressive metal acts, but luckily Cynic still keep their own musings mostly original. Up next is Elements and Their Inhabitants. This song reaches right into that classic Cynic sound with some really cool effects-heavy vocals and a really fresh, glitchy guitar part that is pretty unexpected for these guys. I think that this is a very solid track that actually wraps up a little bit quickly for my taste. I think the bridge in this song really rules, and the building drums towards the end of the track complement the soaring vocals really well. The next track was the main single off of this record, Mythical Serpents. This song threw me for a bit of a loop the first time I heard it because there's so much different on this track. There's really a lot of lo-fi production blended with this very uncharacteristic calmness that meets at this great crossroads for one of the best songs on the entire album. I love how the vocals sound on this song. The entire track vibrates with a very energetic delivery. This is the most natural that the drum machine gets on the album, and it kind of gives me goosebumps because of how much it's hitting all of the right notes to get that kind of nostalgia blast. The guitar work is also definitely nothing to scoff at, with more very technical work that is a pleasure to dig into. I do love the consideration put into the writing because they don't let the track get away from them. The tension builds where it needs to build, and the song flows in one part into the next just seamlessly. The whole thing is really brilliant. Next up is Sixth Dimensional Archetype. This song is a lot higher pace and a bit more dramatic. The song sways and creates a very moody atmosphere. The guitar parts again are incredibly dense within the already heavily produced mix. This song is kind of over before you even notice because of just how much happens within the song. It's a track that I wish they'd kind of used more of a death metal approach with when writing, because it could have very much benefited from some death metal style vocals. The next track is DNA Activation Template. This is probably the only track on the whole album that is like 90% filler. The synthesized soundscapes are kind of interesting, but mashed up with these weird vocoded samples, it kind of turns this whole thing into a bit of a mess. I'm not really sure what the intention was, but so much of this song seems like dead time to me. Unlike the interlude tracks, this song actively impedes my enjoyment of this record. The only point in this song that doesn't feel like a waste of time is the last minute and a half where some actual playing happens. A lot of this song feels like it's just out of place or reaching a little bit too far, trying to be a little bit too ambitious in all of the wrong ways. The next song is Architects of Consciousness. This song is far more straightforward than the last track with a much more grounded structure. It's still pretty different as far as Cynic goes, but it's not nearly as out there as the last song. The intro to this track is a cool slow burn into a really cool fast segment. The lyrics come in and cool things down a bit again, although only for a brief second. There's a bit of a garish synth part in this track that I find really unappealing, but it does kind of have its place, though it is still very odd. This track is kind of a prime example to me of a song that may have been a bit more fitting as a Masvidal solo track. There's just enough here that it's a little bit too weird for me to love this song. Up next is Aurora. This song starts to lose me a bit more. At this point in the album, this line of sonic inquiry is really pointing towards a dead end. I think this song is particularly too much. The vocal work is distracting. The drum machine is used for breakbeats at multiple points in the song. The lyrics are pretty dry. The drama in the song is very unnatural, and I just think this is probably my least favorite song on the entire record. The next track up is In a Multiverse Where Atoms Sing. This song is by far and away one of the best songs on the whole record. The fact that it's juxtaposed next to one of the worst tracks, in my opinion, in their catalog really adds a lot to the quality in comparison. I think the vocal work is lovely, the guitar work is otherworldly, and the drum machine reaches another point beyond that kind of uncanny valley for another very lifelike track. I think the actual lyrics are a bit goofy, but most of the esoteric lyrics on the album are kind of utter nonsense anyway, so it doesn't really matter too much. The final full track on the album is Diamond Light Body. This is another weird one that pushes the envelope more than expected with some very low-key segments in the track. This almost feels like music that would play for, when the credits roll, like the action and the climaxes have passed, and now this is kind of just the reprisal. It's a solid song, and I actually really enjoy how it's stripped down the whole sound of the track as compared to a lot of the album. There's still a lot of dense moments, but there's a lot more headroom in this song, and I think it's a very well-needed track. This is a great album closer and one of the better songs on the album. As for final thoughts on the album, I think kind of the main issue with this album is that it suffers from this minor identity crisis that this album just kind of seems to be going through. There are moments where the writing seems to forget that this is a Cynic album and things just kind of go off the rails. It usually grounds itself again quickly, but there are a couple of moments that aren't exactly flattering to listen to. With that being said though, the overall quality of this album, while not the most consistent, is still very enjoyable. I loved a few songs on the album, have had them in my rotation since the album's release. And as for whether or not this should have been a Cynic record, that's kind of up for debate, I think. I think Cynic has had a good run, and I don't think continuing this band is a wise choice. While not the most fitting note to go out on, I think that most of this album was a perfectly good send-off to the former band members who have passed. I think the songs were mostly heartfelt and thoughtful in that sense. I think Ascension's Codes is a solid 7. Thank you all so much again for keeping up with the channel. I am very sorry for my absence. This past December was one of the busiest months of my life. Between my working life, social life, family life, and my personal schedule, I was absolutely slammed for several weeks. With things calming down a bit, I should have a lot more time to put up more of these videos, not to mention that I'm feeling far less drained, so I also have the energy for it. Also, I've been pretty active on Reverb lately, so I still have a shop open that I've been selling quite a bit of gear on, so if you would like a chance to own a piece of my gear, check out the link in the description below. Also, feel free to follow me on Instagram, that link is also below. Thank you all so much again, and we'll see you on the flip side.